Hi guys. So we are here to do the notes section 5 today. You also have the Grapes of Wrath worksheet to go with the notes today. This worksheet, it looks like it's a lot of reading. I just want you to flip through it. The main thing here is to be able to recognize the connection between the Grapes of Wrath and the Dust Bowl, which we're going to talk about today. Excuse me. You also have on here the review guide, Unit 3, multiple choice. If you've done the review guide, the multiple choice, that's just 10 questions. Um, and remember, these aren't really being graded, but if you want to email them to me, I would be happy to look them over, put some feedback on there, and send them back to you so you can see if you're getting the questions right or you're getting the questions wrong. Okay, one other housekeeping. I sent you a SurveyMonkey this morning. If you haven't done it yet, please do it. It's just 4 questions, really quick, asking you if you would like to do a Zoom class, when, how you're getting your work, things like that. I've been recording that, but maybe some of you have tried OneNote, you didn't like it, you'd rather have me email it to you, or you've tried the blog, you're sticking with it. Just let me know how you're getting your information so we can keep it up to date and I know your preference. Uh, okay, I think that's it. Let's get to it for today. We are working on section 5, the causes of the Great Depression. Over the last 4 videos, we talked about what was happening in the 1920s, how great it was, how culture is changing. You've got the flappers coming out. We've got a little bit more emphasis on school. Kids are going to school. People are buying these new inventions. You've got most families owning a car. You've got the radio in homes. You have vacuums and washing machines and irons and all of these things that are making life easier. And now that those tasks are easier, people were going out and they were going to the movies and they're going on vacation and they're traveling in those cars that they have. So you see a real change in the 1920s on what life is like. That created some issues. We saw that the nativism in the United States was really affecting the people at the time. You have the Red Scare popping up, that fear of communists and how we reacted to if communism was coming to the United States, that fear that someone would come and take down our government. You also saw the fear of immigrants through the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, that fear of the other, the different, the threat that we think is a threat. We also saw that clash between modern and traditional in the Scopes Monkey trial. So while the 20s overall is this time of progression, you did have some tension underneath the surface. Now, as far as the economy went, things were doing great. People are buying, people are working, but the problem is when people are buying, they are not buying with their money, and we're going to talk about what problems that created today. Let's start with the boring though. Now, next year, you guys are going to take economics. We're going to, I mean, I won't be teaching it to you, but you're going to go through the business cycle a little bit more in depth. But for our understanding, we've got to look at these 4 major pieces to the business cycle. First, we have prosperity. Prosperity is what you know it to be. You're going to see lots of business activity, production, people are buying, people are selling, wages are high, the prices of goods are high, profits in business are high, and unemployment is very low. All of that sounds really good. But following prosperity, you dip into a recession. I want you to picture the business cycle like a roller coaster. Prosperity is when we're at the tippy top of the roller coaster ride. Recession is when you start to come down that hill. During a recession, we start to see business activity slows down. There's a little bit less production, a little bit less buying, a little bit less selling. wages, prices, profits, they start to come down. They're not as high anymore. Unemployment is on the rise. Now, just like in a roller coaster, you have to get to the bottom. A depression is the bottom. During a depression, business activity is almost non existent. Very little is being produced, very little is being bought, very little is being sold. People don't have money because wages are low, profits are low because nobody's buying, prices are low because no one's buying and we're trying to encourage people to buy, but people don't have money. Another reason people don't have money, unemployment is extremely high. When people don't have jobs, they don't have money, they don't buy. But every time there is a depression, you see the upside. You start to go back up that hill just like on a roller coaster. When you go all the way down, you hit another incline. That incline after a depression is called a recovery. Business activity starts to pick up again. You start to see production pick up. People are starting to buy. And when people are buying, selling starts to go up. I mean, if you hit rock bottom in a depression, things can only go up from there. So you see wages start to rise, you see profits start to rise. And because of that, it is safe again to start to raise prices. Because all of this is happening, businesses are now able to rehire those people, create more positions, and you see unemployment start to go down. Now, the business cycle is ever changing. For every up, there is a down. For every recession, there is a depression. For every depression, there is a recovery. And we go through this business cycle over and over and over again. So no matter what, when it's bad, it starts to get good. That is the silver lining. Now, a little background on the 1920s. All throughout the 1920s, the Republican Party had been in power. We saw, Harding. We saw Coolidge. Coolidge is going to take us through the majority of the 1920s. He's going to pop out of office in 1928. He gets out right while the getting's good. But during the time that those Republican presidents were in power, the nation is going to be prospering. The stock market is on the rise. People have extra cash. With that extra cash, they're not going to go and buy another Model T. They already have one. You don't buy 2 washing machines, you already have one. So they have this extra cash and they say, what can I do with it? Well, this is when they start to turn to the stock market and they say, I could invest. I could make the money that I have extra turn into extra money. So the Republican Party takes all of the credit for what we call a bull economy and the increase of this American greed, the want to take a little bit of extra money and turn it into a whole stockpile. So maybe you've heard this before, bull economy, bear economy, what the heck do they mean? You see the pictures over to the side. The bottom one there is a statue that is outside of Wall Street. So a bull economy is when stock prices are rising. You might see a lot of buying stocks on margin, which is a quick way to get wealthy. When you buy a stock on margin, you are borrowing money to buy a stock in the hopes that that stock price would go up. If the stock price does go up, then you can pay back your loan and you make more money. But that's all kind of on the hope and a prayer that the stocks continue to rise. A bear economy is a steady drop in stock prices. This is a disaster if you are a person who bought stocks on margin because you borrowed money to invest and then the price went down. So now you owe money, the original amount that you took, and you owe a little bit more. So it's not good for you if you borrow money to buy stocks and the stock goes down, because then you owe. If you borrow money and the stock goes up, then you can pay it back and you make money. So bull economy good, bear economy bad. Um, the problem with the stock market during the 1920s is they had the pricing of the stocks that they were selling was not based in reality. And what I mean by that is because everybody was borrowing money to invest, it looked like there was a lot of money in the stock market. People are investing, but it's not real money. It's all loans. So the pricing is kind of inflated. We know inflation. That's exactly what was happening in the stock market. Prices are going up, but there's no real basis to like connect that rise to a dollar figure. And this whole problem created in the 1920s is going to head us straight for a depression, and we don't even see it coming. A major cause of the Great Depression is going to be the gap between the rich and the poor. We've talked about this before. Remember, during the Gilded Age, that putty we said when we pulled it apart and there becomes this big old gap between the rich and the poor? It's happening again because we didn't listen. So during the 1920s, the rich are going to become richer. The industrial workers become poorer. There is the wealthiest 1%. If you can look at the picture on the left hand side, the blue is that 1% over $10,000 for their income. They earn the same amount as the whole combined bottom 42%. That is a staggering number. So you have to combine the income of 42% of the population just to equal what 1%, one person in the 1% makes. Those who don't have money, those people who are at the bottom, they are borrowing money to buy things that they can't afford to have. So they're the ones that are getting the loans. And the banks during this time, they don't care if you can't pay back the loan. They'll give you the money anyway. The rich people who actually have money weren't buying right now. They said, no, 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 I'm going to save. I have everything that I need. So the money that actually needed to go back into the economy that was held by the rich was being held by the rich. It wasn't being put back into the economy. Too many Americans didn't have the money to buy what they want or what they needed. They borrowed it instead. And that is going to make it look like a lot of people are buying. And it's going to make our economy look really good, but there isn't any real money being put into our economy. It's all loans. Another cause of the Great Depression: overproduction. We talked yesterday about the assembly line, the Model T that Ford was making. It makes it really easy to produce these goods, and it makes it really easy to produce a lot of these goods. When you produce a lot of something, you cut the price down. That's what businesses were doing. They were producing more than what was being sold for the same reason that I just said a minute ago. People don't need 10 washing machines, they need one. You don't have more than one vacuum. You don't have more than one car at this time. But businesses were producing as if somebody was buying a new one of these items all the time. And when businesses realize that they have to cut back on production because people aren't buying as much, they have to cut back on workers too. And when they cut back on workers, then you see unemployment going up. That's not good for anybody. Americans are going to buy these big items on credit because they can't afford it. So items like automobiles, appliances, radios, stocks, we're not really putting real money into these. Sometimes we're buying these items using installments. So they might buy like a washing machine and pay $5 down on it and then pay month to month on it. But who's to say that you have the $5 today and then 3 months down the road you don't have your installment? That happened very often. But during this time, it was easy to get approval for debt. And because it was so easy, nobody was afraid of being in debt. Today, you don't want to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. People realize that debt isn't really that great. Do we all have debt? Yes. Is it normal? Yes. But during this time, you would buy everything on debt and nobody thought about it. They actually were encouraged to live beyond their means. Today we realize I'm not going to go buy a Maserati and get a loan for it, knowing because I can't pay it back. During this time, you would have a factory worker who would go and buy the newest, bestest everything and not be able to afford any of the payments on it. Today, we have banks that keep us in check and say, your income isn't enough to afford to pay these goods, even the payments on these goods. So you can't have a loan for that. Not during this time. They said everybody gets a loan. Doesn't matter what your income is. Take it. And people were like, that's awesome. I'm going to buy everything then. Underconsumption. Because there's overproduction, when people don't buy as much, that creates a problem. So businesses are producing more than what people were willing to buy. Those that didn't have money weren't really, those that didn't have money were spending more than what they had to get things that they may not necessarily have needed. And that's going to be the middle class. Our lower class, those people that are making like dollars a week in these factories, they don't have money. They're not going to buy anything. The middle class is where you're going to see the buying on credit, the overextending themselves to get goods that they cannot afford. They have some kind of an income, but it's not enough to buy everything that they want, so they borrow money. And then you have the upper class that could be putting money back into the economy, but they're choosing not to. They're saving their money. So you really only see one class there, the middle class, that's really buying goods, and that's not enough for the production that's taking place. So there's a general underconsumption of goods in America at this time. And when people don't buy, companies don't need as many workers, they start laying people off so they can lower production, and that is no good. The banking practices. I've alluded to this a little bit as we've been going, but the banking practices are a huge issue that leads to the Great Depression. During this time, banks did not discriminate on who could get a loan and who couldn't get a loan. They did not care. For bank customers, the issue that came up was that the banks couldn't guarantee that their money would be there when times got tough. So what a bank does is they take your money, they give it a home, and you're supposed to be able to go and get it out whenever you need to. Theoretically, that sounds good, but banks don't keep billions of dollars in one of those small branches that's on the corner next to the grocery store. They only keep, like a tenth of what their customers actually deposit into the bank. So if only a couple people come to ask for money, that works. Or if a lot of people come and ask for small amounts of money, that works. But when everybody comes to take all of their money out of the bank, it's not physically possible. They don't have the actual physical currency in their hands to give everybody their money back. Now, that being said, banks during this time were taking the money that people were depositing in the bank to keep it safe and spending it in the stock market and saying, oh, well, we could grow it. We could make more money. that didn't work. So the very few regulations that were put on the banks by the government created these problems, because remember, we have laissez-faire government right now, hands off. We don't want to get involved. The banks are going to be investing money in some places, and when people start to get word of what's happening, because originally they had no idea where their money went. They took it to the bank said, okay, it'll be here for you, and you never think of it again. What would happen is people would get word that maybe the banks made bad investments, or somebody went to go get their money out and the bank said, no, maybe you shouldn't do that, and people would panic. So they would all go to the bank and try to take all of their money out all at the same time. Well, we know that's not possible. People can't do that. Banks don't keep that much money in the bank. So then you would have banks failing, you'd have banks closing, and we'll talk more about this in a minute. But I want to look at the political cartoon that is on the right here. So you have a guy that is labeled victim of bank failure. And you have the little squirrel there, because squirrels, if you know anything about them, they harvest for the winter. They're big savers. And he says, but why didn't you save some money for the future when times were good? And the guy says, I did, but the bank failed me. I did what you do. I squirreled my money away, but when I went to get it, the banks didn't have it. And to give you a little more information, I want you to watch this video real quick. And this is from America, the Story of Us. We're going to watch from, hold on, right here. Okay. This is going to give you a little more information on what happened when people went to the banks.
December 1930. The streets of New York are quiet. It's been a year since the stock market crash of 1929, but only 2% of the population owns stocks. The other 98% get on with their lives. Until today. This man is about to shake America's confidence in its banks to its very core. He's put his money in his local bank, the Bank of the United States. A bank that has only hours left to exist. But a newspaper article questions his bank's stability. This is the moment that begins a chain reaction that will shake the whole country's economy. Yet we don't even know the man's name. But his story was recorded by the New York Times.
A small merchant in the Bronx went to a branch of the Bank of the United States and asked bank officials to dispose of his stock in the institution.
Good day, sir. How may I help you? Yes, I'd like to withdraw my shares from the bank. Beg your pardon, sir.
Bank regulations are virtually non-existent at the time. Bad real estate investments mean the bank has only kept itself afloat by cooking the books.
Good day, sir. How may I be able to sell my shares? The stock is a good investment, sir. I would advise against the sale. I want my money.
The last thing the bank needs is to hand out all its cash.
We almost witnessed that fairly recently, and I've seen what can go on, and I've seen travesty.
He departed and apparently spread a false report that the bank had refused to sell his stock. By mid-afternoon, a considerable crowd had gathered outside the bank, estimated at between 20,000 and 25,000 persons.
This is the day worry turns to panic. Would the banks go the same way as the stock market? Hysteria spreads like wildfire. $2 million are withdrawn from this branch alone.
Even though all the anxious depositors who asked for their money before closing time were given it, the crowd became restless. A squad of police were sent in to control them.
The trouble spreads to other branches. By the next morning, the Bank of United States has collapsed. Confidence in U.S. banks disintegrates. In the last 60 days of 1930, 600 banks shut. Banks close in wave after wave across the country. By 1933, there are 28 states without a single bank open. Unlike today, the federal government does not bail out the banks. Unemployment goes from 4 million in 1930 to 12 million in 1932. Every day, 1,000 homes are repossessed. 200,000 vagrant children wander the country. 34 million Americans have no source of income.
Okay, so that gave you a little bit of an idea of just how fast panic can spread. All it took was one person saying, the bank doesn't have my money, and then everybody goes to the bank and tries to pull all of their money out all at the same time, and the bank just can't possibly keep up with it. And add on top of that the very lax regulation of the banks, and that creates a powder keg of a terrible, terrible outcome. And we'll come back to these banking practices over and over again as we move into the Depression. The final, I don't want to say final, but another cause of the Great Depression is the Dust Bowl. This is where the focus of the Grapes of Wrath is tonight. So we saw during World War I and even a little bit before that, farmers had bought very expensive equipment and to keep up with production demands. These expensive pieces of equipment were often bought on loans in the hopes that as they produced more, they would make more, be able to make the loan payment, everything would be fine. Now, during World War I, you see production going up. We need tons because we're shipping it all over the world. It's not just for the United States. But following the war, production goes down. There isn't as much of a demand for the goods that farmers are producing. They just have to produce for the United States and maybe a few other countries, but not at the same rate as during World War I. So now farmers have to find a way to cover those debt payments that they have from buying the expensive equipment. And in order to try to keep up with it, they plant more crops. And one of the popular crops was wheat. Now, during this time, we didn't really understand how to rotate crops or what to do for the land, and wheat crops would deplete the soil of their nutrients and make the land completely unsuitable for planting. But farmers have to pay the bills, so they kept planting wheat in excess. Because they weren't selling it, they have a surplus. When you have extra goods, in order to unload it, to get rid of it, you lower the price. And as the price goes down, it doesn't make up for the money that you need. So farmers are going to take out more loans for the bank to buy more equipment and land to make up for the price that's gone down. And now we just have this terrible cycle of taking out more loans to pay off the debts to try to just keep your head above water. And then you add on top of this a drought, and then everything explodes. So now you have droughts, you have poor farming practices. This is going to make the soil completely unfit for farming, and you are going to see the Dust Bowl occur in the Great Plains. And we're going to come back and look at pictures of this from the Great Depression during the Dust Bowl, but this was just another tipping point that got us closer to the Great Depression. In the next section, we're going to look at how these causes had some effects for the Great Depression and what these actually make happen. So tune in next time, if I can find my little, there it is. Tune in next time for section 6 and email me with any questions.